we're on to barrier 8, expenses problems. In terms of this barrier, what issues may arise?
Well, I think sadly the first thing to say is that most organisations don't pay most volunteers. Quite sad. So if you get expenses, then you're doing well, and that's rather shameful, I think. Sometimes there are limits to what expenses will be paid, or they're paid late, or they're paid with a bad grace, and that's very sad, I think, and it doesn't reflect well on the voluntary sector. It also creates a problem in that some volunteers don't need expenses, and good luck to them, and they can not claim their expenses, or even better perhaps, they can claim their expenses and then donate them back to the organisation. But if we set up standards in agencies of, I've heard phrases like, oh, we don't claim here. Well, that may be all right for people who can afford not to claim, but there may be people on very tight pensions or people living on benefits, and that just won't do at all. So if we follow that to its logical conclusion, the only people who can volunteer with us are people who are doing very nicely, thank you. Obviously we need people who are doing very nicely, thank you, but it does reduce the pool of volunteers that we can draw on.
Okay, and in terms from a volunteer's perspective, what does this symbolise to them?
Well, yes, I mean, I think a huge question with volunteers is how do we reward them if we don't offer a salary check once a month? And obviously we don't offer a salary check once a month. So I think there's an emotional or moral issue about this, that volunteers who find that their expenses are paid late or with ill grace or having to queue up for expenses, they'll take this as a token of the value that the agency puts on them. So if those sorts of practices happen, volunteers may feel quite appropriately that they're not well valued by their agency. They have to be out of pocket for their volunteering for periods perhaps, and the agency doesn't seem to express its appreciation and respect for them through their expenses system.
Okay, and obviously as a way of valuing volunteers, it's another way of doing it, and it's extremely important. There are two sides. One is the organisational perspective on expenses. Bearing in mind some organisations have got a lack of resources, but there are also the cases where you have volunteers who form a clique and an expectation that everyone is like them. Do you have any comments about?
Well, I think, yes, that's the root of comments like, oh, we don't claim here. And a sort of financial climate is set up whereby poorer people don't feel comfortable about claiming, that they're going to be ostracised or in some sort of outgroup if they go ahead. And that's really unfortunate, I think. So, and the claiming and granting expenses should be entirely confidential and anonymous anyway. So people shouldn't know whether or not you claim expenses or what you claim the expenses for. That should be done between the volunteer concerned and perhaps the volunteer coordinator or the agency treasurer. It shouldn't be public knowledge.
Okay, just I mean, I'm just skipping ahead a bit, but in terms of what you've just said, and in terms of perhaps a middle class perception of volunteering, do you think the voluntary sector is more middle class than not?
I wouldn't say that it's necessarily more middle class than not, but middle class people seem to dominate in terms of who volunteers. So quite surprisingly to me, I didn't expect this, it's people who seem busiest in the middle years of their life, who might have demanding careers. They've often had good educations, perhaps children as well. These are the people who seem to volunteer most, rather than say single people or in less demanding jobs or unemployed people who might be thought to have time on their hands. So I find that very interesting.
Yeah.
So certainly more than a fair share of middle class prosperous people are volunteering, which is great, but we want poorer people, I think, to volunteer in equal numbers and in equal proportions, make it as easy for them. I think there's long been a tradition in UK volunteering that it's slightly the well-to-do, rather patronisingly perhaps, looking after the not very well off. Now that has to change, so there's win-win volunteering, And we all know we get things out of volunteering just as much as we donate to our volunteering. And so I think rather than we giving to them, we feel the relationship should be much more equal now. So I think addressing issues like expenses makes that far easier.
But I suppose the other thing that just popped into my head was that poorer people tend to donate more of their income proportionate to charities than more well-to-do people,
Yes.
which is really quite interesting.
They donate less money, but as you say, proportionately more, which is very interesting.
So they give perhaps in a different way.
Indeed.
Yeah. Anyway, that's good.